Imagine you wake up one morning, check your phone, and the number you see makes your stomach drop. Maybe it was a stock position that collapsed overnight. Maybe it was a business you poured 3 years of your life into, only to watch it dissolve. Maybe it was a layoff notice that came without warning, and suddenly the financial plan you had built so carefully feels like it was written in sand. Most people think financial loss happens because of bad luck. They think the market was against them, the economy shifted, or the timing was just wrong. But here is the uncomfortable truth that almost no one talks about. Most people don't lose money because of bad luck. They lose it because of how they think after the loss. The worst financial decision you ever make is rarely the one that caused the loss. It's what you do in the weeks and months after it. And that distinction changes everything. Stay with me through this video, because what you are about to hear is not a motivational speech. It is a deep, honest framework for understanding financial loss, recovering from it, and ultimately using it to build something more durable than you had before. What financial loss really means. Let's start with a definition that most financial channels will never give you, because it goes beyond spreadsheets and portfolio balances. Financial loss is not just the disappearance of money. At its deepest level, financial loss is the destruction of a story you told yourself about who you are and where you are going. Think about that for a moment. When people experience a serious financial loss, whether it's a failed investment, a business that didn't survive, or a sudden job loss, what they describe feeling is rarely just stress about money. They describe something much more personal. They feel like they failed. They feel like their identity has been shaken. The confidence that allowed them to take action in the first place quietly disappears, and suddenly every future financial decision feels dangerous because the last one hurt. And that distinction changes everything. This is the part of financial loss recovery that almost nobody addresses. You cannot fix the mathematics of loss until you understand the psychology underneath it. The numbers on a spreadsheet can be rebuilt in months or years, but an identity that has been shaken by loss and a mind that no longer trusts itself, those take far longer to recover, unless you have the right framework. Loss of confidence is one of the most underestimated consequences of financial setbacks. It is what causes people to sit on the sideline for years, watching opportunities pass, paralyzed by the memory of what went wrong before. It is what transforms a temporary financial setback into a permanent shift in behavior. And understanding this is the first step toward genuine financial recovery. Here is the first real insight. Financial loss is psychological before it is financial. The hidden psychology of loss. Now let's go deeper into the human mind, because this is where the real battle is fought. There is a concept in behavioral economics called loss aversion. It was identified by psychologists Stephen Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and their research showed something fascinating and humbling about human nature. For most people, the pain of losing $100 is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining $100. We are not wired to treat gains and losses equally. We are wired to feel loss more intensely, more viscerally, and more personally than we feel equivalent gains. This is not a character flaw. This is biology. For thousands of years, the instinct to avoid loss kept human beings alive. But in the modern context of personal finance and investing, this same instinct becomes a serious liability. Because when loss aversion is operating at full intensity, people stop making rational decisions. They start making emotional ones. In moments like this, you're no longer thinking like an investor or a strategist. You're reacting like a human being trying to survive. Here is what that looks like in practice. A person experiences a significant drop in the value of their investment portfolio. Rationally, the correct response might be to hold the position, reassess the fundamentals, or even add to the position at a lower price. But the emotional response is panic. And in that panic, the person sells at exactly the wrong time, locking in a loss that might have been temporary. They exit the very position that could have recovered. Or consider someone who starts a small business and hits a rough quarter. Rationally, the data might suggest that the business model is sound and the dip is seasonal. But emotionally, the loss feels like confirmation of their deepest fear, that they are not good enough, that this was never going to work. So, they quit. Not because the business was failing, but because the pain of the loss became louder than the logic of the strategy. This is the hidden psychology of financial loss, and it operates quietly underneath every money decision you make. Let me introduce you to 3 of the most common and most destructive patterns people fall into after experiencing financial loss. I want to share these through the lens of real situations, because the abstract becomes powerful when it becomes human. The first dangerous reaction is panic and emotional decision-making. Consider a man named Michael, a 38-year-old engineer from Toronto, who invested a significant portion of his savings into a technology ETF during a period of strong market performance. When the broader market corrected sharply, Michael watched his portfolio drop by nearly 30% in a matter of weeks. The stress became unbearable. He sold everything, converted it to cash, and told himself he would re-enter the market when things settled down. That moment never arrived for Michael. Not because the market didn't recover, but because the anxiety of re-entering felt exactly as overwhelming as the anxiety of watching the drop. Michael didn't lose money because the investment was wrong. He lost because he made a permanent decision in a temporary situation. The second dangerous reaction is avoidance. This is what happens when the pain of loss is so significant that a person simply stops engaging with their finances altogether. Meet Rebecca, a 44-year-old marketing director from Chicago who experienced a painful divorce that came with serious financial consequences, including debt she had not anticipated and assets she had not protected. Instead of addressing the situation head-on, Rebecca avoided looking at her bank statements. She avoided speaking to a financial advisor. She avoided the subject entirely because every time it surfaced, it brought a wave of shame and helplessness. The avoidance felt like relief in the short term, but the avoidance was quietly making everything worse. Fear-based stagnation is one of the most invisible forms of financial self-destruction. The third dangerous reaction is what I call the revenge decision. This is the impulse to win back what was lost as quickly as possible, usually by taking on significantly more risk than is rational. Think of a young investor named Steven, 29 years old, based in Vancouver, who lost a substantial amount of money after following online trading advice on a speculative stock. Rather than stepping back and reassessing his approach to investing, Steven doubled down. He began trading with leverage, chasing increasingly volatile opportunities, convinced that the next move would recover everything. It didn't, and the second loss was worse than the first, not just financially, but psychologically. The revenge mindset doesn't recover losses, it compounds them.
The mental reframe that changes everything. Now I want to offer you a perspective shift, not a toxic positivity, everything happens for a reason platitude. Something more honest and more durable than that. Financial loss, when examined clearly, is not failure, it is feedback. Loss is not failure, it's tuition. And whether that tuition becomes valuable depends on whether you extract the lesson or just carry the pain. Think about what feedback actually is. Feedback is information. It tells you what worked and what didn't. It tells you where your assumptions were wrong. It tells you where your strategy had weaknesses you hadn't previously identified. And in that sense, every financial loss, no matter how painful, carries a message. The question is whether you are willing to receive it or whether the noise of the emotion is too loud for the signal to get through. There is another way to frame this that I find deeply useful. Consider financial loss as tuition. Every person who has achieved meaningful, durable financial success has paid tuition somewhere along the way. They paid it through a business that didn't survive. They paid it through an investment that went to zero. They paid it through a job they lost, a partnership that collapsed, or a market cycle that humbled them. The difference between the people who grow wealthy over time and the people who don't is not that one group avoided paying tuition. It's that one group extracted the lesson from the experience, while the other group just felt the pain and moved on without understanding why it happened. This is the investing mindset and wealth psychology that separates long-term builders from short-term reactors. The step-by-step framework. With that mindset established, let's talk about what to actually do. Because if you don't have a structure for how to respond to loss, your emotions will create one for you, and it will almost always make things worse. This is a framework I call the 4-phase recovery system, and it is designed to move you from emotional destabilization back to strategic clarity. The first phase is emotional stabilization. This is the phase that most people skip entirely, and it is the reason their recovery is so much harder than it needs to be. Before you can make a single intelligent financial decision after a loss, you need to create emotional distance from the event itself. That means giving yourself a defined period, whether it's 48 hours, a week, or even a month, depending on the scale of the loss, where you do not make any major financial moves. You process, you talk, you exercise, you sleep. You do whatever your mind and body need to move through the acute phase of the stress response. Decisions made in the middle of financial grief are almost always the wrong decisions. The second phase is financial assessment. Once the emotional storm has passed, it is time to look at the full picture clearly and without self-judgment. This means writing down exactly where you stand financially: total assets, total liabilities, monthly cash flow, and any obligations that have changed as a result of the loss. This is not a pleasant exercise, but it is a powerful one, because clarity, even when the picture is difficult, is always more useful than avoidance. You cannot navigate from a position you refuse to look at. The third phase is strategic rebuilding. This is where the real work begins, and it begins with asking one specific question. Given where I am right now, not where I expected to be, not where I was before the loss, but where I actually am today, what is the most intelligent next step? Strategic rebuilding is not about recovering everything at once. It is about making one sound decision, and then another, and then another. It is about rebuilding the habit of disciplined financial action, because that habit is the actual foundation of long-term wealth more than any single investment or income stream. The fourth phase is long-term thinking. This is perhaps the most important phase of all, because it repositions the entire experience within a broader narrative. Your financial life is not measured in one quarter, 1 year, or even 1 decade. It is measured over the full arc of your decisions, your habits, your discipline, and your ability to recover and adapt. The wealthy investors and entrepreneurs who have endured serious losses and come back stronger did not do so because they found some secret investment vehicle. They did so because they maintained a long-term vision that was larger than any single setback. Consider a woman named Jessica, a 51-year-old small business owner from Calgary who built a successful retail store over 12 years only to watch it close permanently during an unexpected economic contraction. She lost not just the business, but a significant amount of the savings she had reinvested into it over the years. By any measure, it was a devastating financial loss. But Jessica did something that changed her trajectory. Instead of running from the experience, she spent 3 months doing a thorough post-mortem on every financial decision she had made in the business. She identified the exact moments where she had over-leveraged, where she had avoided difficult conversations with her accountant, and where she had let optimism override sound risk management. She enrolled in a financial literacy course, she began consulting for other small business owners, and within 2 years, she had rebuilt a more diversified financial foundation than she had ever had before, one that was no longer dependent on a single income stream. Jessica's story is not exceptional because she recovered quickly. It is exceptional because she chose to use the loss as a masterclass rather than a definition. That is financial loss recovery at its most powerful. How the wealthy think about loss differently. Here is something worth knowing about people who build and maintain significant wealth over time. They do not have a loss-free record. The average investor tries to avoid loss. The wealth-minded investor expects it, plans for it, and prices it into every decision. In fact, many of the most successful investors and entrepreneurs in American and Canadian history have experienced catastrophic losses at various points in their careers. What distinguishes them is not an immunity to loss, it is a fundamentally different relationship with it. Wealthy individuals tend to view loss as a data point, not a verdict. They understand deeply that risk and return are permanently connected, and that the only way to eliminate risk entirely is to eliminate the possibility of return entirely. They invest in their own financial education relentlessly,
because they understand that knowledge is the only asset that cannot be taken away. They practice genuine risk management, not by avoiding risk, but by sizing it appropriately and never placing so much of their financial well-being on a single outcome that one loss becomes existential. And they maintain emotional discipline with extraordinary consistency, not because they don't feel the pain of loss, but because they have learned not to let that pain dictate their next decision. These are the personal finance strategies and risk management principles that separate wealth builders from wealth seekers, and every single one of them is learnable. Practical lessons to carry forward. Let me leave you with 4 practical principles that should inform how you approach money and investing from this point forward. First, never concentrate so much of your financial life in a single position, asset, or income source that one loss becomes existential. Diversification is not just a portfolio strategy, it is a philosophy of resilience. The goal is not to avoid loss entirely. The goal is to make sure no single loss can take you out of the game. Second, before entering any investment or financial commitment, define in advance what a loss would look like and whether you could absorb it. This is not pessimism, this is risk management, and it is the foundation of every sound financial decision. Third, build the habit of separating your emotional state from your financial decisions. Create systems, whether they are waiting periods, trusted advisors, or written frameworks, that prevent emotional reactions from becoming financial consequences. And fourth, invest in your financial education continuously, not because one book or one video will change your life, but because the cumulative effect of understanding how money, psychology, and markets interact will compound over time in ways that no single investment ever could. Avoiding emotional investing is not just about restraint, it is about being informed enough that panic has nowhere to take root. The deeper truth. Here is the thought I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with it genuinely. Financial loss is not the end of your story. The most important financial decision you will ever make is not the one that caused the loss, it's the one you make next. It is the moment your real financial education begins. Every person watching this who has experienced loss, who has felt the shame of it, the fear of it, the silence of sitting with a bad decision and not knowing how to move forward, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are for the first time in possession of information that no one can ever take from you. Information about yourself, about your relationship with risk, about the decisions you make under pressure, and about the kind of financial life you actually want to build. The people who rebuild after loss do not do so because the universe gave them a second chance. They do so because they chose, deliberately, to extract meaning from the experience and move forward with greater clarity than they had before. That clarity is available to you right now, and it starts with the decision to stop treating loss as a verdict and start treating it as a lesson. Thank you for watching. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, financial resilience isn't built in the good times. It's built in exactly the moments you just learned how to face.